that he's going to be talking about 70 weeks or 70 sevens. The Jewish word for week is really 7. And so they thought in terms of sevens. We're also going to talk in a minute about Jubilee. The year of Jubilee occurred after 7 sevens. So 7 years, 7 periods of 7 years each, 49 years total, and then that 50th year would be the year of Jubilee. And you'll find out why. You say, what's that got to do? Well, it's one of the theories about it. All right. Gabriel's mission was to help Daniel to understand the future of the city. Now think about what we've been saying consistently, what Daniel's concerns were. Okay, what was Daniel really concerned about? I hope I found, his people. He wanted to know that his people were going to be okay. Obviously, he wasn't that hung up, I don't think, on the kingdom. But obviously, the Jews, what were they expecting? Even at the time of Jesus, what were the apostles still expecting? The return of the kingdom. Well, is it at this time that you'll restore the kingdom? All right. So there is an ongoing lack of understanding of what was going to happen. Daniel, in his mind, that the only people of God were the Jewish people. All the rest of the people were heathens. They were terrible. Now, the Jews, even at this time, understood, and they allowed people to proselyte and to practice the Jewish religion. But they were the chosen people of God. And so Gabriel is going to come to help him understand the future of the city. What city would that be? Jerusalem. Of the holy mountain, which is, I think, Hailey's right on that, center of divine judgment, and the people of God. And that of course, is a people that are of great concern to Daniel. Now, Hailey presents, and I'm just making these points because they're good points again to remember about approaching and understanding Scripture. He says, consider the problem and ponder on it, number one. Number two, consider what God has said relative to it, to whatever it is you're pondering. Pray about it. Then if you lack understanding, ask of God for the wisdom that you can understand it. And then, I added, wait on the Lord. Sometimes we grow weary and we're not willing to wait, but ultimately, I think we can come to an understanding of most anything. Now, in this case, prophecy, sometimes maybe we don't get a complete, full comprehension because we're not in that time frame. We don't have the same frame of mind, the same thoughts, the same background to necessarily understand all of it. But we understand enough. What was the purpose of this prophecy? That's what we went through in Isaiah. What is the purpose of prophecy primarily from God? Now, I understand it's to tell the people about what's coming, and it's good. But what is the overriding importance of prophecy? I'm sorry? To build faith, because it proves and validates that God is the God. There is no other. There's none of these other false gods that have been able to come up and do prophecy, truly prophesy what's coming. Again, we're talking in pretty good detail 200, 300 years before. And then you talk about Jesus, and now we're talking about in real detail. And now we're out there at 700 years before it occurs. So if we had no other reason, and we have multiple reasons to understand that God is the God of this world, not of this world, but over and the creator of. Prophecy would surely provide that. Now, the 70 years prophecy, the time period we're in, is right now, at this point of the time of Gabriel talking about the 70 weeks, is about 539, 538 BC. I'd already mentioned 77s and the idea that the word for the week is 7. There are two approaches primarily to understanding the 77s. There's a chronological, a literal 70 weeks, and in that case, in other words, that they are figurized, I think is the term McGeegan used. Not figurative, but actual 70 weeks, 490 years. And under that, there's a millennial view and a non-millennial view. Now, we've been talking about the millennial view only to the degree that we need to, things that we might need to understand as far as how the world might look at certain portions of Daniel and of the Bible. So the non-millennial would be that does not believe in or doesn't teach or doesn't lead to the 1,000-year reign of Christ on earth and all the things that go with it. The millennial would be the one that does hold to that. Then there's a symbolical approach, and I think that both I've been using Ailey and McGeegan for my primary references, but others as well hold that it's more symbolic in nature. I think McGeegan thinks there's some general time frames that do hold, probably a little bit more so than Haley does. Haley says since the dreams were symbolic, in his opinion, there's no reason to make the numbers literal. Mm-hmm.
I agree with what Randy said, that the purpose was for faith.
Right.
Build faith. I'm reading from Romans 15 when it talks about the things written before. It says that they were written through the encouragement of the scriptures that we might have hope. And so to go along with what you've got right now, the idea was not so much a timeline, the idea was to teach hope.
That's correct.
You have to have the faith. I still go with that.
Yeah. Thank you. That's a really, really good passage to bring in and illustrate what we're talking about. We have, going back to the prayer today, I don't know, maybe things bother me more than some of you, but we have some things going on. Well, my mother's 95, and she thinks the same thing, that the only time in her lifetime she's ever seen some of the things that have occurred in our society and our government and our culture over the last several years. And it's frightening because we suddenly have where everybody used to seem to hold pretty close to the same ideas about loving the country and abiding by our laws. Suddenly we find a lot of other ideas that seem to be driven. They certainly could come from Satan and his thinking. A lot of confusion, a lot of strife, a lot of hatred that's being planted. And so it can be discouraging. But for Christians, if God be for us, who can be against us? We will prevail, even if it's not until the final day of judgment. But God cares about his people and provides. And so he also provides, if nothing else, hope. Hope for the better things that God will provide in the future. All right, so I'm going to put up two little simple diagrams. The upper one is the non-millennial, but using 490 years, and nothing fits perfectly. Generally, that's true almost in most prophecy. But and then in the lower one, we'll find with the millennial view. And there's just a couple of main things I want to point out in this. So over here, you see in red, if that's big enough, I don't know if y'all can read in the back or not, but that says Ezra receives or has permission to go to Jerusalem in 458 BC. These are general. It doesn't represent everybody exactly who has these thoughts or concepts, but it's trying to give an idea. So it starts with Ezra being given permission to go to Jerusalem 458 roughly BC, followed by 69 weeks of years, or 69 sevens of years, which is 483 years. And starting in 458 BC, and you subtract 458 from 483 to get to the positive side. Remember, BC were the numbers, it's like a number scale if you think about it. It's just 0 in the middle, and going that way it goes upward, but it's negative, and going that way it goes upward, but it's positive. So coming this way and taking those numbers, we go past 0 BC by roughly 25 years. And that would be fairly close to the time that Jesus was baptized. That's followed, now this is not certainly to scale, since this here is 483 years, and that is 7 years. So followed the baptism of Christ, and then we have a 7-year period, and in the midst of the week, he is cut off. The Lord's ministry was cut off at about 3.5 years, about half of 7. Remember, we've talked about these numbers that are holy, 7 being what? What does 7 generally mean? Symbolically? Perfection, completion, 7 days in a week, a complete week. So it could mean symbolically that which is complete, or in this case, they're saying half, which could mean not all of it, part of it, or they're taking it as really 3.5 years. Now, on the lower one, we have millennial, and they begin at the decree involving Nehemiah, which occurred in about 445 BC. And again, you take, and I'm still scratching my head trying to figure out exactly, but 483 years takes you 38 years past to 38 AD. And somehow this is supposed to be about the time of the cross, and then you have the church age. Now, the bigger picture is this. In this thought, 69 weeks comes up to Jesus, and then there's some give or take some different things, and then time stops. Okay. And then we have the church age. Now, remember this, I don't know that everybody holds to that today, but a lot of the early, back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, there was very definitely a lot of people who were saying the church was a substitute, that Christ came to establish his kingdom, it was rejected, and therefore the church was established just to take the place until Jesus came again to reign 1,000 years. And I think most everybody in here knows that that's just way off from what the Bible teaches. But nonetheless, this is and I'm not meaning to belittle anybody, I'm just saying that is a point that is held. So this is the church age, and it's not counting time. And then we get to a final 7 years in the 70th week, and that's when it begins with rapture. And rapture's the idea that those who are righteous, and again, I cautiously I use any language because there's a lot of variation, but that they are taken up with Christ. They're not going to have to suffer what's going to follow, which is the tribulation on earth. And then Jesus will come back at the end of that 70th week, and he will establish his kingdom, reign on earth 1,000 years, and that's the millennial reign. Any thoughts or comments or anything? Somebody may have studied this thoroughly and may have a point they want to make. All right.
Jimmy, yeah, I have studied it a bit, and I agree. I just don't see rapture events happening. In the text, it seems like some type of global cataclysmic event when we look at the writing of it, a simultaneous event.
Right.
Christ returns. However, I do know that with this millennial way of thinking of the end of times and stuff and what happens is prevalent in our society. And I've met people that have believed in it, but I've also met people that believe in it and are absolutely, though, by their life producing fruit for Christ. And the judgment isn't upon them from me because their fruit is evident. I see it, and I'll have a discussion with them about the rapture and millennialism. Perfectly fine, but if they believe that and be like, you know what, I still believe kind of in the rapture, like, I'm gonna leave it alone probably because I've seen fruit from people that do this, and I've seen people that are non-millennial, and I don't see any fruit from them. And so what's the answer here?
Yeah, and the point being made that there are a number of people who simultaneously believe in premillennialism and yet practice most, if not all, of the Bible and are in so many ways serving God. And that's I think a good point to keep in mind is don't just, they believe in 1,000-year reign, therefore I'm not going to fool with them because they're a bunch of crazies. That's not the case. You look at the language of the prophecy and you can see in some ways how people get into that and they're really aroused by some of the language. However, then you go to the only real point of 1,000 years is in the 20th chapter of Revelations. And if you read it literally, then it is the souls of those who were beheaded for the cause of Christ will rise and live and reign with him 1,000 years. Well, if the 1,000's literal, then the souls of those beheaded for the cause of Christ should also be literal as well. You really are not. One of the rules I think everybody generally agrees should prevail, but don't necessarily allow it to prevail, is that a passage you don't go little symbolic, little symbolic, little symbolic. That a passage is presented either in a literal way or in a symbolic way. And so, and I think it's good to start. I've got some very dear friends who hold very much to the millennial views. So I appreciate you coming on that. But it's sometimes hard to get hold of, and it has evolved over the years from really the big first push that I remember was in the 70s, and then the I've lost the book now, the Late Great Planet Earth, thank you, was really the one that aroused, and there was a movie and all sorts of things came out about it. One of the interesting things to me is that in many of the beliefs in that 1,000-year period, those who otherwise would have been lost can become saved. In other words, they'll choose whose army they're going to be in effectively. And so it almost reminds you a bit of the Catholic doctrine of purgatory as far as second chances go in that regard. So, all right, we're going to probably get one more in. As a summary, 458 BC, there was a command to rebuild Jerusalem, and Artaxerxes gave the approval for Ezra to go to Jerusalem. That's Ezra 7:1 and following. Daniel 9:25 says, from the command to Messiah is 69 weeks, that's sevens, 483, and I did the math, 25 to 26 AD. This is about the year Jesus was baptized and received the anointing of the Spirit. I'm just trying to, in your mind, you just kind of maybe want to lock in on some of these if you're studying any of this one way or the other. In the millennial literal view, Sir Robert Anderson had a book, and that's where that one drawing came from, The Coming Prince. And so I think that's McGigan that had drawn upon that for that sketch. 445 BC was the decree mentioned in Nehemiah 2 and 1. That gets us to about 1 week or 7 years, up within 7 years, but it's really after. And so Jesus is cut off actually within the 69 full weeks, not into the 70th week. Prophetic clock stops, as I said, at 69 weeks. And then we've talked about the rapture and so on. All right. Now, this is a colorized illustration, adding some of the other things that would occur. And this is a literal, non-millennial view. And in this case, you see us beginning at 458 BC over here. 490 years, they're saying to the solar day, takes us to 33 AD. And some of them then teach that the war in heaven occurs in here, which if we understand Revelations to be dealing, John, okay, we're through. So let me stop here and we'll pick up here next on Wednesday. Thank you.